Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Natalie and I talking through how to coach beginner clients part two. So last week we kicked off part one of the series talking through the intake, some initial considerations when you're getting to know your client that will kind of help us dictate, like from a psychological perspective, where they're at, and how we might approach coaching that person. So part two here, we're really going to be digging into more of the X's and O's of your nutrition, training setup, kind of big picture goals, things you want to focus on with those clients from the start. Now, before we get into that, Natalie, anything to fill us in on from your week?
Say this every week, but I really mean it this time. I have nothing. Nothing in my plan has changed. I didn't even check in this week because my coach was on vacation and he said, please don't check in. So I honored that, and I did not. But I'm also at a place where, like, I'm kind of cruising a little bit. Like, I wouldn't anticipate changes this week,
Yeah.
or next. So, training and eating. I know I've mentioned this on socials a couple times, but I'm feeling large and in charge.
Feeling juicy.
Yeah, it's feeling pretty meaty. We've kind of reached that point in the build where you're like, man, like my clothes are pretty tight. Um, but at the same time, like it's fine. It's more like a noticing than anything. Like I don't necessarily
Yeah.
have an emotion attached to it. I've told a couple of my clients this week, when we're having conversations about like the scale and things like that. Um, I'm not gonna like pretend like the scale doesn't affect me. It doesn't the way that it used to years ago. And it doesn't now in the sense that like it doesn't make or break my day. Like it just I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and I have trust in the plan. So it's like it is what it is. But I will say like it's kind of that reaction when you like see a number that you haven't seen in a while, you still like kind of flinch. You're like, oh, oh, hello, haven't seen you
Oh
in a
yeah.
while.
It can still be quite a surprise. I mean,
Yeah. And then it's like like past trauma, kind of like comes up like wait, are you going backwards because the scale isn't moving up? And you kind of have to just be like, no, you're in a growth phase. Like it's doing exactly what it should be doing. Um, so I guess what I mean is like that conversation with myself has gotten so much like faster.
yeah.
Like it's like before, like a few years ago, it might be more like, I don't know, like, and now it's like that conversation in my own mind happens like so quickly that like within 30 seconds, I've like made peace with it, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, good, we're good. Report the data and carry on.
That's funny. Andrew and I were talking about the exact same thing this morning, except for the other direction, where
Yeah.
when you're in fat loss, and as I feel this is the least attached I've ever felt to the scale, and it like I've been able to, because there have been a lot of weeks lately where it just hasn't moved, but I can see
Yeah.
myself getting leaner and I'm making progress, and it literally doesn't bother me at all. And I feel like it's funny how like this is the first time I feel like I've been able to just be that detached from it. So it's funny to kind of consider that in both directions, and I think both are big progress.
It's a really cool metric of progress, I think.
Hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
um, and I made a social post about this, I think within the last few days, but basically like one of the cool things about undergoing like a successful fat loss phase, for example, is like you now just have proof and confidence that your body can lose fat.
Hmm.
That like you're not broken, like how this works, you understand the science, which I feel like makes all of this like psychologically easier. Because for example, right now, like building and seeing the scale go up, it's like, okay, but I also know that we're gonna turn this ship around at some point, and I'm not worried about it, because like
Right.
that's just part of the plan. And
Yeah.
like likewise with you, it's like you're checking your boxes every day, you're doing exactly like what you and your coach have discussed, and you are seeing like visual changes despite maybe not seeing like the number shift all that much, but like you're seeing changes. There's it's like if something needs to change, like that's on your coach. Just you got to just tick your boxes, report the data, and like it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, especially when it comes to fat loss, that's a really good point. It is easier to feel comfortable in that building phase when you know, am able to successfully lose fat. I've seen myself do it.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people have such a fear of not being able to because maybe they felt stuck for a very long time, like they were doing everything right, they weren't making progress in the past. I have a couple of clients right now where it's like, dude, we're in fat loss. We are like week 12, 13, 14 of fat loss, and we're getting ripped. We've made incredible progress. And there's still like this fear, like every time the scale isn't moving, of like, is it not working? Like
yeah,
I'm just like, what if I don't get there? And it's like, hey, we don't have to worry about this. You don't have to worry that your body won't respond because it already has responded, right? Like we're
exactly. Like
doing,
you already have tangible proof.
yes, like we've made incredible progress here. So we can like kind of start to let go of that. But it just takes time, I think,
It
working through
does.
that. And like the more exposure you get to that, going through the different phases, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, and while I know that neither of us are like proponents of yo-yo dieting or anything like that, going through these phases multiple times like is honestly like such a flex on yourself. Like it's so powerful to just kind of like experience your body and your mind during these different phases because again, what you're doing along the way is you're collecting evidence, proof, and therefore confidence. Um,
Fire.
so that's I don't know. I think that's really underrated, and I think I notice this a lot when someone has gotten like the leanest they've ever gotten. And like you said, maybe they were stuck prior to that.
Right.
Um, but like that one time that they just like get really lean and they're like, oh man, like I did it. This is awesome. Then it becomes terrifying, like not to hold on to that. And so that transition from like out of getting like super shredded lean into like, well, okay, we can't some more often than not, we can't always stay there. Not
Yeah.
exactly there, you know? And that's really scary, because like, but I like busted ass. I worked so hard to get there. And now like, I've got to let it go and I'm never going to get back there again. It's like, no, 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 that's not true. And then I think the point that we've both been making a lot recently too is that really the more muscle tissue you add, and it's like this constant cycle of like adding muscle tissue, stripping fat, adding muscle tissue, stripping fat, which like extrapolated over years becomes a long-term body recomposition. This is how you live leaner.
Yeah.
Like this is how you are able to maintain a leaner physique year round. You've got to go not yo-yo diet, but you've got to go through the iterative process intelligently, strategically, multiple times likely to really get to that quote end goal that I think most people kind of like fantasize about when they get into this.
Yeah, honestly, I think letting go of that end goal, realizing like there'll always be another goal, and just like the process in itself is where the fun is, will make
Yep.
all this a lot more fun. But yeah, I think when people are at that place where it is like fat loss is working well, and now I'm scared of regaining it afterwards, which is another like super common conversation. Well, like, what does a reverse diet look like? What if I gain body fat then? That being another common fear. It's man, every like okay, fat loss has worked well now. Every time, like the longer we spend with this phasic approach, doing things well, the more responsive your body's going to be, the easier fat loss is going to be, the more muscle we're going to be able to build. Like it's just gets easier and better over time. So again, you can kind of let go of that fear. But let's get into the topic at hand. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. So discussing coaching the beginner client, let's start on the nutrition side of things. Natalie, when we're working with a newer client, what would you say are kind of the initial goals you're looking to accomplish with said client typically?
So, like we discussed last week, we need to start out with getting crystal clear on like what that goal is. So what physique are they aiming for? What health goal per health outcome? Maybe they want to be able to like run stairs with their kids or like or whatever, pick up the kids or keep up with their grandkids. I don't know. But what that end goal is. From there, we need to work backwards. Right. And this is, we've already done intake, which we talked about last week. So we already have a really good idea of like, we've done a needs analysis. Like we know where their skill set lies. We know pretty much for the most part, like where their obstacles are. Like what are the big rocks that we can turn over first? I guess you could call them small rocks. What are the pebbles that we could start with, I guess? But that's what you really need to do. Like when you're designing a nutrition protocol from the beginning is figure out like let's turn over some big rocks. So I'm going to stick with the big rock analogy.
Okay.
Um, Typically for most clients, but especially for this beginner client, my first goal is like, I just want to get them feeling really good, like in their, like physically. So this can be broken down into like more detailed biofeedback. So basically, I'm looking at like, are they sleeping well? How's their energy throughout the day? That's a really big one that I see with a lot of beginner clients is like you'll notice energy shifts. So my first goal for them typically is like, I want to get you feeling better. I want to get you sleeping better, feeling better. Um, no energy crashes, like I said, like even stable mood throughout the day. I don't necessarily want them to be spending time like being hungry. So I want to make sure that they're well fed, not overly so. There's an appropriate amount of hunger that's okay, like right ahead of meal times for sure. But basically, like you want to just get them feeling really good, because even though their quote end goal, is likely something like a physical goal, or I want to look like this or something like that, they're going to be so bought in if they feel dramatically better. And in my experience, those shifts like really do tend to happen within the first couple weeks.
Oh yeah.
So if you
If
can, and again, we are talking about the beginner client, like who
mm,
hasn't necessarily like worked on their nutrition yet. Um, so that's where I'd want to start. And through that, we're also trying to like build confidence. And this is also skill acquisition, I always like to call it, where we're kind of learning habits and foundation and also getting their consistency under control. So like those are what I like to focus on first, because if you're a coach out there, you can probably figure out how all of those things lead to future like skill sets, or how we're going to add on to that, and like how that ultimately is going to lead to the bigger goal, right? Like we need to make sure they've got the habits and foundations. Like this person might have never tracked their food before in an app, so we got to learn how to do that. Maybe they've never used a food scale, weighed and measure their food. They might not even have consistent meals throughout the day. I think I touched on this last week a little bit, in the kind of intake. It's like, are they kind of like waking up and it's like, well, I'm not hungry, so I'll just eat my first meal at noon. But then maybe they wake up the next morning and they're starving, and so then they have a big meal, right? So you can see how like typically someone like that is not going to have consistent energy because calories are energy, right? So if there's kind of no consistency day to day with calories, with meal timing, that's when you get a lot of those fluctuations. Um, so that's, I mean, that those are the big rocks I want to turn over first. Those are the things that we're going to be pursuing, and I like to lay that out to them too, because a lot of times, like this client is, set on fat loss. Like I hired you because I want to lose fat, and like I understand, but like it's your job to educate and explain how these things are going to lead to where they want to go, and like why these things are just so essential to get right. So in a lot of times, like for my plans for my more beginner clients, I will actually write down like what I just talked through. Like this is what we're going to be focused on for the first, and I'll overestimate too. I'll say like 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, or like whatever. And then if we get there sooner, cool.
right.
But that way they know like we're actively like I am looking for improvements in these things. So it's not just this like really nebulous like, oh, like let's just, this is what we're doing. It's like, no, 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 we're working towards like getting this skill set down, like getting your confidence up, and like how to manage meals out, and like here's why this is important. Like for your goal, this is why we need to know how to do this.
Yeah. I just onboarded a client today who is a lot newer, and I explained this as this is kind of like we're building the foundation for your house. Now, we don't actually see like the end product, but 8 weeks, 12 weeks down the road from now, once we like, for in this instance, it was we get into the fat loss phase. That's kind of like where we're actually like building, framing the house, and actually like this beautiful house you can see. If we didn't take the time to do that, like we're never gonna be able to build that house in the first place. But very much is just foundational. But I think that the with this client, they typically do want fat loss.
Yeah.
And it's rarely that it's like this person is broken and they need like some crazy extensive health phase to fix them to be able to lose fat. As oftentimes we just don't have the skills in place to
Yeah.
be successful. But it is funny how much better, like typically people will see body composition improve a lot. They'll get leaner in this phase versus if we right out of the gate start this person with the intention of fat loss. there's typically so much pressure on
Yeah.
themselves and honestly on the coach to lose body fat that the person like overthinks things, they struggle more, and there's not like very quick result, or as soon as we kind of hit a lull in progress, it's easy for that person to just, this is just another thing that doesn't work for me, and give up on it. So I have found the same thing, like, hey, the process right now, and like we're feeling better, we're nailing your carb needs, we're getting feeling really good in your training, whatever it may be. Yeah, that like getting people to focus on that initially sets us up so much better for long-term success.
Yeah, setting expectations here is incredibly important. Because
Mm,
if you keep them focused on this skill set and you kind of keep reiterating, like, hey, the focus right now is not necessarily on seeing the scale go down. Setting that expectation is really important. And it's one that you might have to revisit every single week and check in, because like again, as clear as I try to be with like this is what we're focused on, a lot of times like this client will still come back and be like, well, I'm doing the things, but like I'm still not seeing, and it's like you have to remind them, yeah, and that's not the point right now. And I kind of like to talk a little bit ahead, like, hey, here's what's coming down the pike kind of thing. And when I talk about an actual fat loss phase, I like to say, listen, I want, like, when you get into fat loss, I want the hardest thing for you to be a little bit of FOMO and a little bit of hunger. I don't want it to be like, I have no clue what I'm doing. How do I make this work? Like, I want your biggest challenge, again, to be FOMO, because, like, man, I wish I could, like, go out all the time or whatever, and hunger. Those should be the hard part, not like all of this skill set that we outlined. Um, and further, what I also will say is like, man, like I'd say 9 times out of 10, a client that you get feeling better, like physically, I would bet that there have been shifts in body composition as well. They might be small, they might be subtle, the scale might not change, but like show me someone who feels radically better within 4 weeks that doesn't have something to show for it. Now, again, I don't lead with that. I don't lead with like, we're going to get you feeling better and I bet your body's going to start changing. But that goes back kind of into that, like getting them more focused on like the actual task at hand and not that end result.
couldn't agree more. Okay, so getting into more tangibles with the nutrition, then, like, are you initially like, hey, I'm just giving someone a brand new food plan? Like, when we're looking at, okay, how am I manipulating and actually changing someone's nutrition? What are you typically starting with there?
I kind of want to take this in two different directions, which I didn't outline here, but I think this can go in two different directions.
Okay.
The first is we take what it is they're doing and we improve upon it. So like and again, like maybe they're not even tracking in an app yet, like in Chronometer. Maybe maybe you just had them write down, like, tell me what you're eating. Tell me some foods that you like or whatever. And you're working with them to kind of like mold that into sort of their own meal plan. So it's like, hey, like really like what you're doing here. Maybe we could add a protein to this meal, or like, hey, you're going a really long time here between meals, and then we tend to like overeat a little bit at dinner time. Maybe we can put a snack in there, or maybe we can round out your dinner a little bit more, like, so we're kind of making suggestions like that. So I'd say that's like kind of one side of the coin, is like take what it is they're doing and give them ways to improve it. That way it's like they're already eating foods that they like, so there's no buy-in there.
Right.
But you're kind of coaching them through like making their own meal plan in a way. Now, then the other side of the coin is like we do get some beginner clients that are just like ready for change. And they're like, honestly, like, can you just give me a meal plan? And it's like,
Mhm.
yes, I can. And we have seen success with some beginner clients with that, because what that does, now you'll hear a lot of people say, like, I don't give meal plans because it doesn't teach the client anything. I see where they're coming from, but at the same time, what I've seen is like when you kind of get some clients on a meal plan, now I will also say you get their input. Like you make sure that these are foods that they eat and enjoy. Like it's not some like random meal plan, like I've never eaten this in my life sort of thing. But the sooner you kind of get them onto an eating schedule, like, and that consistency, the sooner they're going to experience those shifts. And that actually ends up teaching them, like, oh, like this is what actual like meal timing does for me, like eating consistently, protein consistently throughout the day. Like, oh, like I feel the cause and effect here. This is really motivating. And then from there you can work with them more on the education side of things, of like, right, so here's a great framework that has been really successful for you right off the bat. Here's how we might want to look at like rotating our foods, and kind of empowering them to like, all right, we're sick of chicken, like, cool, what can we swap it out for? So it's never just
Yeah,
like I'm gonna like put you on a meal plan and see you later. It's never that, but I have seen both approaches work very well.
I think when it comes to the macros versus meal plan thing, when someone is, when you're working with someone who's newer to this, unless they have, really, when you're working with someone, unless they have already seen success tracking macros, tracking their food, it's pretty rare that they will be able to make that much progress if that's all the structure we give them. I mean, think
Mhm.
about it, like every person you know has probably, almost everyone has tried tracking their food at some point. Now, you know, a group of people, like the listeners, this probably know a group of people who have been successful with it and they're already like way into fitness and things like that. Yeah, we could probably just give them macros and it would work well. But if they're not, which is demographic, or they haven't been successful with it, which this demographic typically hasn't, you're gonna need more structure. So again, like something like a meal plan can be more of, here's how we can actually change your day, go about hitting your food targets. Like here's what good food selection looks like. And then over time they can understand, okay, here's how this kind of plays into the macros. Like the client I was showing you guys on our call this morning, my client Sue, who just started a couple weeks ago, she's crushed it. I'm really excited for her, especially her coming from a place where she felt like nothing had worked for her. And I mean, basically what we did is I had her lay out what she normally eats in a day, the food she likes. I did still like take what she was already doing. It was like, okay, breakfast is super hectic. Like I am just like running out the door. I don't have time to prep much. So it's okay. We have like a couple single serving Greek yogurt cups, an orange, which you can just like peel once you get to your work, and 10 almonds, right? And then breakfast or lunch was still just like a sandwich, but we added some veggies to that on the side. And then like just a couple very, very simple, easy meals to make that weren't that different from what she was doing, but just a plan that's easier for her to follow. And we also filled a lot of gaps from a micronutrient perspective. And it's cool, like already her digestion's so much better. Her weight's moving down very nicely. But if I would have just given her like calorie targets, it's fair. Like, hey, here's your calories and protein. It's very rare that I see that work out well with that demographic.
Yeah, so since we are talking about this like total beginner client, like I can't think of a beginner client that I've ever like hit with targets at all. Where I'm like, hey, like hit these calories, because like, again, that's depends on their skill set, right? But like, since we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the beginner, this person, like, probably hasn't tracked their food before. How are they going to know that they're hitting 2,000 calories? So like, we got to acquire that skill. So this is where, like, again, like what you said, hey, get an idea of what it is they're already eating and like improve upon it, essentially. Like, and usually we're adding things, right? We're improving by like addition, less by omission or subtraction.
Absolutely.
And then, another approach I've taken a lot, which I do want to like credit with, I want to credit like Jeff Sue. This is something like I kind of took from him through some of his courses, but this idea of like a mix and match meal plan, which is very collaborative, where you're basically talking through like, hey, let's like build out a meal plan that you like. So it's like choose a protein from this category. Like, so this meal maybe has like a protein and like a serving of carbs and then like a serving of fats or something. And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe if it's like right before their workout, it's like, okay, let's like take, two servings of like a carbohydrate of your choice, kind of thing. So you're kind of getting their input, and like, the more that you do get their input, typically the more buy-in you're going to have as well. Because again, they have a little bit of autonomy and say here, and through this, you're teaching them how to build balanced meals too, and you're also
Yeah.
teaching them like these are proteins, these are carbs, these are fats. So they're kind of getting intro to like the macros and what they are. So again, you can see how like all these things that we've just talked through will come into play later, as the client gets more advanced and we can kind of like get into some higher skill things.
Yeah, and I think the rate at which you're feeding them this information is also important. It's easy to want to, I just want to give this person as much value as I possibly can and over
Yeah.
explain why we're doing every aspect of this program. But typically for this client, I'm keeping it a lot shorter and a lot more succinct. And then again, the client I was referencing before. So, okay, we've been following the meal plan. And I said, all right, so when you have like a meal out or something like that coming up, let me know and we'll talk through how to make that work. So she like had a trip. She wanted to eat at Chick-fil-A and Panda Express. So I
Solid
like
choices.
talked her through, really though,
Yeah.
talked her through, okay, so based on this, like, hey, from Chick-fil-A, we could go with this option or this option, and like this side or this side. Same thing with Panda Express. Here's what I'm looking at. Like basically we want like something similar calorically. We want like a protein source that's probably not like fried or breaded. We want to hit our protein targets, basically match our calories and match our protein for this meal we're swapping. Like that fruit's gonna be like fruits and veggies are gonna be more satiating, yada yada yada. So then within that, I'm starting to educate her on here's kind of like the why behind this. Here's how we think about our food selection. But it's easier in like little bite-sized portions like that typically than like just dumping everything at once or like just sending a whole like PDF as far as like, hey, here's how you track your meals out. Okay. From a skill acquisition perspective, anything else you would touch on there that we didn't mention so far?
Yeah, I'll just touch lightly on things that, probably a lot of the coaches out there have experience with or have at least heard of, but like things like hand portions or like even measuring cups. Like, again, this we don't need to be concerned necessarily with like optimality at this point because it's likely not going to be optimal. But that's okay. We're not necessarily going for optimal. We're going for improved upon what they're already doing.
Right.
So like that's where like measuring cups, like if maybe they haven't weighed and measured their food, like are they as accurate as a food scale? No, of course not. But like, does your client probably have them at home? Yeah, and that's likely a bit more consistent than they've been in the past. Whereas
Oh
like
yeah.
maybe before they were just like eyeballing and doing whatever. It's like okay, well now you consistently have them eating like half cup of rice with every meal, kind of thing.
I really think the food selection changing is one of the biggest things here typically. That's the point I was going to make earlier, where with this client, I'm trying to keep food selection very simple, where there's like very, very little room for error. Um, so I mean, like, I'm probably not going to work like a lot of olive oil into this person's plan, for example, or like, I'm not going to have like a 20 ingredient recipe here, just like very simple things where it's very cut and dry. Or even you said like with the hand sized portions, where there it is typically like, okay, we're eating lean proteins, our carbs are like potatoes, rice, fruits, things of that nature, where even if they're not nailing the hand sized portions perfectly, probably going to see considerable progress just from the amount of calories we've reduced. We're going to be a lot more satiated. We're eating a lot more protein.
It's
So,
basically like simultaneously cleaning up food selection.
exactly. Exactly.
And so that's when we do tend to see a lot of benefits to digestion. And yeah, sometimes like they will end up maybe dropping some weight, shifts in how they in their pictures and measurements. Um, but again, like the point that I want to keep making is like everything that you're doing right now is something that can be it's foundational and it is something that can be built upon later down the road. So like the importance of what we're doing here is like yes, like these single ingredient foods are like just you probably will get the benefit of like cleaning up the diet, digestion, all those things. However, like think about further down the line, right? When you get them into fat loss, like and also essentially you want to get them kind of like they want their results for life, we're going to assume, right? Like anyone who wants results probably wants to keep them. So this is kind of that intro to like this life kind of thing. So if you can kind of get them acquainted with and used to how to construct meals from like single ingredient foods and like not needing to lean on these like 20 ingredient list recipes, you're setting them up for long-term success because this framework for food is going to be how they're going to keep their results. And also further down the line, maybe like fast forward 2 or 3 years and they're just like shredded and they're gonna like step on stage for a bodybuilding show or something like that. Like those are the principles they'd be following.
100%. Okay. So when it comes to movement, what's your typical starting point there?
Um, First and foremost, like again, like we talked through with intake, you want to know what it is they're doing. So like from a gym perspective, and I guess we're gonna get into training a little bit later, but from a movement perspective, so let's keep this to like cardio and neat. What are they doing? So like how I usually like someone that I onboard, and honestly this is any level, I typically have their step goal as like a TBD that first week, and I'll say like, hey, just track your steps this week and like give me an idea of like what you're doing. And then this is where you start to also get some information like, oh, I just really love to like hike on Saturdays and I usually do like a 5 mile hike or something. It's like, okay, that's good to know. But kind of questions like that, like, are they doing any cardio of any kind? Again, like I think you've done a couple of podcasts recently talking about kind of high energy flux and like, getting people moving more. So that could come into play too. Like maybe they're not doing cardio, but we kind of like do want to kind of implement some of that. And again, this person is a beginner, right? So cardio can also be a great way to introduce this person to the gym. Get them in the gym, like on a piece of cardio equipment, just get them familiar with the gym setting. Um, so really, we need to figure out like what it is they're doing. And we need to figure out also what time do they have like available for these things. Maybe they're a shift worker, in which case they're like logging 20 to 30,000 steps a day.
Right.
In which case we might be trying to, troubleshoot like when can we get you to sit down?
Yeah. And I mean, it varies a lot. I think when I think of beginner clients, I typically think of weight loss cases.
Yeah.
And normally, like a beginner weight loss case, they're very sedentary. And
Yes.
one of our initial goals, I do the same thing where I don't even establish a step goal week one. Hey, just track your steps. Let's see where they fall. And then we're going to establish a target from there. And normally, if it's like, okay, we're at 3K per day, cool, I'm going to bump you up to like 4.5 to 5.
Yeah.
Depending on the person, I won't, it depends really if I would like give them cardio out of the gate or not. There's also kind of a, okay, so for example, I think of like one of my clients from years ago. I think I worked with her in 2020 or 2019. 2019. Just signed back up. Now, we had pushed things to a good place in the past. I wasn't as good of a coach back then, obviously. Um, but also like
Or
she
even
had,
smaller,
I was even smaller. I was tiny back
which is
then,
hard to
honestly.
imagine.
It is hard to believe I was a miniature human. But they, not they, she had a kid. Her life changed drastically.
Mm.
Now I know she like has a lot of these skills, so there's a like a much smaller learning curve. So for her, like I did, hey, we're gonna start with 3 days a week of cardio alongside what we're doing with everything else because she's already surpassed a lot of the learning curve. Whereas if it's just like, man, this person doesn't know anything about nutrition, and I'm worried they're gonna get overwhelmed with too much, I might not add any cardio in at all to start out. But I think that like frame is very important as well. Cool.
Um, I think worth mentioning here also is kind of like we talked about on the food front, under that umbrella of like take what it is they're already doing and improve it. So a
Hmm.
lot of your job is as a problem solver. Like that's what we do as coaches, right? We like navigate obstacles with our clients. We help them problem solve. So okay, this client is coming to us and they get like 2 to 3K steps per day. We know that we need to get that higher. Maybe not
Right.
immediately. So we're not going to take them from 3 to like 10K overnight or anything like that. But this is where we can make suggestions like parking farther away or like habit stacking, like tacking a walk on to like your meals. It's like, so okay, every time maybe this person works from home or like an office campus kind of
Yeah.
situation. It's like, okay, so like after every meal go for like a 10-minute cruise, and you're kind of like trying to inject like more movement into their day. Or maybe it's like we're gonna roll out of bed and first thing we're gonna do is get outside and like walk around the block, things like that, because you have to take into account that this client wasn't doing any of that before, and now they are, so it's automatic improvement. And then these are things that are also tend to contribute to improved digestion, improved sleep. So
Yeah, that is pretty similar to the nutrition. You talked about like adding things with the nutrition oftentimes versus us taking away a whole lot. And have a second is a very good way to put it, where it is a lot of times like, hey, okay, so let's start by, can you just start your day with a 10-minute walk? Is that realistic? Or end our day with a 10-minute walk? Or can we like go for a walk over lunch? Just little things like that with this client. That is often how we're implementing versus just the X's and O's of like, we're going to add 10 grams of oats here and we're
Right.
going to yada, yada, yada. Okay.
And the
Getting
third
into
strategy, which is when we suggest that they should just get a dog.
that is honestly that is the best thing to do. Um, Natalie's getting a dog soon too, by the way.
Yes, I am. I'm going to announce it here, so I have to hold myself accountable.
Okay, so when we're putting together their training, what are the initial considerations you are taking into account here?
So time available for training. Like, okay, and we'll also start with like what is it they're already doing? Again, this is a beginner client. So maybe this client has not stepped foot in the gym, or maybe they have and they just kind of like don't know what to do. It's like, yeah, I just kind of like go because I feel like I should and I just kind of do whatever. Or like maybe like loosely following some kind of program online. So you
Right,
got to find out what it is they're doing.
right.
Um, I do like to see how they move initially. Because that does give me some insight into like, oh, this movement might not be the best, for us right now. Um, what kind of gym equipment do they have available? Like, do they have access to? We're pretty familiar with like Planet Fitness, for example. So we have a lot of clients there. So we're very familiar with like the equipment there. Maybe they go to like super cool gym. I don't know, but those are some good things to find out. Um, and I would say you kind of want to also assess like confidence and just
Okay.
like competency, like movement competent. Like maybe this person, I don't know if you could consider someone who used to do CrossFit like a beginner. But like, what have they been doing? Like were they doing like F45? It which is not the same thing as like hypertrophy training, but like you do move a lot in that class. So it's like, okay, that person's like probably decently like coordinated. But
Yeah,
we do have a movement screen. And I like it because I like to like get a look at you can tell if someone's like moving with confidence. So like regardless of what the movement screen is, so regardless of what those movements are, I get to see this person's body and like how they move. Are they moving with conviction and confidence? Like what's their limb length like? Like I take that into account. It's like, oh, okay, this person's probably going to struggle a little bit getting into this setup sort of thing. Is this person a little bit more like, quad dominant, hip dominant, something like that? Or like you tell with some people right off the bat, like, well, okay, we're definitely gonna like have to deal with some shoulder function stuff. So that's and these are things that as a coach I might not necessarily clue them in on. And that's kind of what you were saying, which is like I'm not gonna blast this person. I'm not gonna turn the fire hose on and blast this person with like every thing that's going through my mind. Like you kind of want a slow drip. I'm not going to be like, well, you see, we're going to program this for you because we can see that your scapulothoracic joint is not quite like that's too much. Even if you're thinking it, and even if that's like your thought process for putting their program together, I am like looking at things like that. Um, and then also, you want to know like how much time can they really devote to training. And I like the way that you have always phrased this, and you'll always say like being hyper realistic. Like how many
say
times?
that shit.
Huh? You
Yes,
gotta
I do say
trademark
that.
it. I'm gonna keep using it. But being hyper realistic, how frequently during the course of a week, like can you get to the gym? And
Right.
like are we talking about an hour? 45 minutes, hour and a half, and I know typically like people will give us a range, like, I don't know, like especially the beginner client will often be like 6 to 7 days. Like I'm in. They're like ready, and I love that. I absolutely love that enthusiasm. But if someone comes back and says like 6 to 7 days, I'm all in. I'm like, okay, how about 3 to 4? And then if they give me a range, I'm typically gonna pick the lower end of the range, especially for this client. So if someone says to me like, I don't know, 3 to 4, cool, we're doing three. Because it's one of those things where like, I'm all for pushing people, But again, this is the beginner client. Like this isn't part of their routine yet necessarily. So it's like we want to remember what I said earlier about building confidence. So it's like we want to get really good at going 3 times a week, every week, and getting really consistent with that. And you know what? And I say to people all the time, because a lot of times this client is very gung ho and enthusiastic, and I'll say like, show me that you can go 3 times a week, every week, and if you absolutely love it, absolutely, we can add a fourth day. And that's actually my client Sam comes to mind. She is someone who we did start like just on the treadmill, like just
Right.
getting familiar. There was like big time gym intimidation, and like got her just on the treadmill, like in the arena, so to speak, like learning the ropes, and then eventually like moved her over to the weight section, and she started 3 times a week, and now she trains 4 times and like never misses.
It has just had an absolutely insane transformation as well.
Yeah, she's a boss. She is a boss.
I think there too, like, just you kind of touched on this with like, hey, were they in F45? Were they a CrossFitter? Someone's training history and that movement screen tell me so much. Looking at the way they move, just going through basic, like, what does a squat look like for this person? What does a lunge look like for this person? Tells me so much about what I'm going to be able to hit them with and be successful with out of the gate. And that's like one of my first goals with this person is just setting them up with something that's relatively easy to be successful with, even if I'm not too worried about optimal at this point.
Yeah.
If you see their squat and it's like this person's just falling all over, their heels are like coming off the floor, and it's like the most uncomfortable thing I've seen, I'm probably not gonna have that person do like a dumbbell roof and elevated split squat yet, or like even like a Smith machine squat. I'm probably, or even like a hack squat. I'm probably gonna have them do like maybe a leg press, right? Or even like a horizontal leg press, where, and similarly, thinking of the complexity of setup, like this person, where it's like, dude, where like the gym in itself is kind of intimidating for me. I'm a lot less thinking about, am I like challenging this tissue in the length and range? Like I might give them just a dumbbell lateral raise over a cross cable lateral raise, or just a horizontal chest press in a machine over a dumbbell chest press, because I just want it to be easy for them to get in there, start like establishing something they can be successful with and getting into the routine and getting more confidence. And then over time, they'll be ready to like take on more challenging elements of that. But that's a lot of where my head is at initially.
Yeah, I think you'll find also, I think it depends because I feel like you could argue it either way, but like if this person is a little bit intimidated by the gym, um, you could take this a couple ways. Like one way, you could like put them in a bunch of machines because it's like, yo, just like slide in, do your thing, and slide out. Like you don't have to think about it, just like get in there. Like a leg press, for example. However, the other side of the coin might be the client who like the even though you and I perceive it as like just slide in there, give it hell, slide out, that person might just have general anxiety about the machines. Because I hear this a lot from people who are newer to training or who don't train. They're like, I don't know what any of these machines do. And so there's like intimidation factor there. So that might be one where like maybe they are more comfortable at the dumbbell rack.
Yeah.
And like we can do some like dumbbell rows and some like dumbbell bench and things like that. They might not be like as stable, but I think I've seen with a lot of my beginner clients, I've seen like the dumbbell rack kind of be that bridge a little bit. Like it's like less. I find like it's less intimidating for people.
100%. I agree. Barbells machines do seem to be a little bit more so, versus dumbbells are like for everybody and feels very comfortable with for some reason.
Yeah, I think everyone has that at some point in their lifting career, usually at the beginning. I think has that kind of fear of like looking silly or like I'm not going to know what I'm doing or like people are going to judge me, like I don't know how this machine works or something like that. And um so I think dumbbells are kind of like a good remedy for that. And I will add a caveat here or sidebar. Like I have often recommended to some of my clients, I'm like, even if you're starting at a new gym, I'm like, go get the gym tour.
Yeah.
Tell your client like when they first walk in and sign up, or at some point, like ask the guy at the front desk, like, can you just like walk me around and like show me how some of these machines work? Because honestly, people, the staff, if they're any good, should be happy to. But also, like, find a jacked person at the gym because they're usually like the nicest people. and like they love to talk about this stuff. So if you do have a question, or if your client has questions, like tell them, like go, don't be shy, go ask someone. There's chances are someone who looks jacked is dying to nerd out about this. So so give them that opportunity.
Oftentimes, it's the only thing we know how to talk about, so we'll always jump on it. So, from a training perspective, I would say I like a 3 day a week full body split for this individual. If they're
Mhm.
like just not a gifted mover yet, the more the intensity needed to be able to stress whatever tissue enough for us to like struggle to recover with training 3 days a week is just not going to be there yet. So we can use a higher frequency and just get this person more frequency practicing like your squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, and get them more skilled at those movements sooner. I do like that a lot. Other common splits that you use, if any.
I have used like an upper lower full or lower upper full or whatever, because
Yeah, I like
sometimes
that as well.
it really depends on like, and this is where I do want to get clear on their schedule,
Hmm.
because a lot of times like this person's willing to commit. They want to get into it, but it's like not their lifestyle yet. So it's like this person, what if they're like, "Oh, like I only want to train like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday." Then it's like then I like that upper lower,
Yeah.
cuz like you're not
Don't
it's
want
not
those two full body days back to back, basically.
right. Right. And again, like that is going to matter less at first.
Hmm.
And I think something else you could mention here in programming is like it is okay to program the same movement multiple times that week,
Yeah.
because a lot of times like we just need exposure and we
Hmm.
need practice. So again, like you said, the intensity component just isn't going to be there yet, nor should it. Like we need to get skillful, at the movement first. But it's okay to have like RDLs in there twice a week. Like there's a lot to work on.
Yeah.
And you'll see that kind of like repeated, exposure will pay off in the long run in terms of skill acquisition and movement exposure.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that really ties into exercise selection. What are the biggest things you're looking for when it comes to exercise selection?
I feel like all of this is like bleeding into each other because, I was going to say, like, I typically am looking for movements that have, a lot of external stability, but then
Mhm.
we'll add that note that we were just discussing in terms of like, is there intimidation in terms of like some of the machines?
Right.
So, like, a lot of the machines will be more stable, but like, is this person intimidated to use the machine? Well, then that's a non conversation, right? But when I think of like, things that I definitely want to put my beginner clients on, it's definitely going to be things like your leg extension, your leg curl. Those are like very safe movements. Like
Hmm.
some of those more like isolation lifts and things, like just to kind of like expose them to like getting them in the machines in a very stable setup. Um but we really want to be focused on like teaching those foundational movements like your hinge, squat, lunge. Definitely with that lunge, like we probably do want to have some sort of like single leg work. And then with your upper body, push pull, both like vertical and horizontal. So thinking about things a little bit more functional and movement pattern rather than like, oh, we're doing this like bro split, or like the nuances of like, well, we've got to get like some rear delts in there. It's like you know in time.
Yeah, 100%. With this individual, I am much more focused on movement patterns specifically than I am, hey, I want to really develop this division of their clavicular pec because nothing's really developed. Nothing's really, or of their pec, the clavicular division of their pec. Nothing's really like that well developed yet. And we just need to get them moving. And down the road, we're probably going to get more specific with their training. But again, just getting them good at these basic movement patterns, getting them confident is huge. Um, Sometimes leaning more towards, again, depending on the person's competency and these other variables we talked about, sometimes leaning towards more movements with more external stability. Again, like a leg press versus a barbell back squat, for example. Uh, if I can teach that person, like, hey, here's kind of what a squat pattern feels like without having to go through like weeks and weeks of them being frustrated, like trying to learn a barbell back squat, great. But again, that's going to be very much dependent on where the person is coming from.
This is
Go
also
ahead.
I will now I don't there are some movements I don't program a whole lot. But like an example that comes to mind is like the goblet squat.
Yeah.
I will often program this for some beginner clients to like get them into a squat pattern because
Right.
like front loading that weight like will, adding that bit of kind of like external load is going to help put their body in that position and like get them, like get their torso a little more upright, get their knees over their toes. So like things like that I might not program for a more advanced client because we get into like loading issues and things like that. I might as a teaching tool.
Yeah. I mean, really, I think in summary, the goal here is first mastering the execution of these patterns because we need to be able to execute a squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull. We need to be able to do those well before we can actually effectively stimulate hypertrophy, right? If I'm like my brand new client, I have them in like a heel elevated Smith machine squat to really bias their quads and they have no idea what they're doing and they don't move well at all. I'm not getting more out of that. Where like maybe the goblet squat is the best teaching tool to kind of eventually progress them there.
you know or like when
Anything?
it comes to single leg work, oftentimes like balance is a rate limiter.
Yeah,
Maybe like hip internal rotation's not there or something. Like that's one where I'll definitely be sure like to add a hand support or
for
something.
sure.
Just like I'm a bit more likely to make sure those aspects are like covered because it's going to get them into the position better and get them expressing force more efficiently, which is what we want.
Love
Um,
it.
so yeah.
Any other considerations on the training side?
Um, no, I think
Okay.
we've kind of covered everything, but just
Uh,
getting them confident, I think, is the underlying theme too. Like not pushing them into the deep end too soon.
and it is easy to want to do that because you get so excited about the potential the client has.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it doesn't allow us to maximize that person's potential if we like try to bite off more than we can chew too soon. Anything as far as the coaching process as a whole that you wanted to touch on here then before we wrap this up?
I have my notes here that and I know my clients hear me say this all the time, especially when I like will onboard someone. I always like to just make it a point that like this entire coaching process really is like we start with a hypothesis, we test the hypothesis, and then we refine it. And that is just the iterative process over and over and over. So the more experience you get as a coach, typically the closer your hypothesis will get, right? So no coach, I don't care how knowledgeable they are, how much experience they have, no coach like knows exactly how you the client are going to respond to something.
Right.
Mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physically. But with time and experience, your hypotheses tend to get a lot closer. But again, like as you continue to work together with your client, you're testing those hypotheses and then you refine from there, right? So kind of like we said, it's like, oh, okay, like maybe I kind of have a hunch that like barbell back squat is not going to be the move out of the gate. So like I'm going to start with a goblet squat because we need to get this person into this position. So we're going to test that out for a little while, see how that goes, see what kind of progress we can make, and then refine from there. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really important as especially when we're working with newer clients. I mean, any client to not feel like the plan has to be perfect or understand the plan won't be perfect from day one. This isn't me saying just like don't try, don't put any effort into your plans. Spend a huge amount of time creating like a new client plan, but it is very much, hey, this is our best guess at the starting point. Let's see how your body responds to things. And the magic is in the adjustments. That's how we really dial things into what you actually need based on how your body responds because we don't know what response is gonna look like until we actually work with you. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? All good if not.
no, I just hope that that was helpful for like some of our newer coaches out there, or anyone who's taking on like the beginner clients. I know last time we talked about how important it is to be able to coach this avatar. Um, yeah, and then
Perfect.
I'll also make another note that I still have some spots on my roster. So if you want to get jacked, please reach out to me. I would love to help you and see if we're a good fit. yeah, really excited to get some new unicorns in the stable here.
Let's get jacked and lean. I love
Hmm.
it. I have a few as well. Both of us, for first time in quite a while, have been taking on more new clients recently. I've been having a lot of fun with that. I mean, it's been real. Like I didn't take on clients for so long, and then my roster's way bigger than it's been in years. But I've been having so much fun with it. I mean, so for both of us, both taking on new clients currently, you can either shoot either of us a DM. You can just fill out the coaching application linked up in the show notes. Happy to chat about it. Make sure we all feel like it's a good fit. Similarly, if you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor, leave us a 5-star rating and review, and we will catch all you guys next time.